The cabin went silent. A single slap echoed through the air, freezing every heart on that flight. Passengers gasped, phones went up, and the flight attendant stood trembling, completely unaware that the woman she had just slapped wasn't just any passenger. She was the owner of the airline. Welcome to Swift Tale. If you're visiting our channel for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because today's story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, respect, and judgment. Have you ever seen someone look down on another person just because of how they appeared, only to find out they made the biggest mistake of their life? Well, this story takes that idea and turns it into a lesson the world won't forget. In today's episode, we'll uncover the shocking events aboard Flight 227, a flight that began like any other but ended in worldwide headlines. A flight attendant, frustrated and exhausted, made one terrible decision, a decision driven by prejudice, assumption, and pride. And the woman on the receiving end of that slap. A calm, quiet, and unassuming black CEO, traveling without her entourage or status symbols, just trying to experience her airline like an ordinary customer. What happened next would shake an entire company and become a defining example of why humility matters more than hierarchy. This story isn't just about a slap, it's about perception, power, and the danger of judging people by appearances. It reminds us that greatness often wears humility as its disguise. It's about how one moment of arrogance can destroy a lifetime of reputation, and how one woman's grace could change an entire corporate culture. So stay tuned till the very end, because as the story unfolds, you'll see that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one no one sees coming. Now let's begin the journey from the moment our mysterious passenger boarded the plane to the moment truth came crashing down like thunder in the sky. Buckle up, because Swift Tale is about to take you on a ride filled with shock, emotion, and redemption. It was a crisp Monday morning at JFK International Airport, the kind of day when the world felt alive with movement. The terminal buzzed with travelers dragging their suitcases, businessmen glued to their phones, and flight attendants hurrying to their gates with polished smiles hiding their fatigue. Among them was Clara Thompson, a senior flight attendant known for her precision, discipline, and though most wouldn't admit it, her short temper. She had been working for Skylink Airlines for nearly a decade, and while her professionalism was admired, her lack of patience often created quiet whispers among the crew. Today, she was leading Flight 227 to London, a flight she wanted to get through quickly with no surprises. But life had other plans. At the check-in counter, a woman stood alone, quietly observing the commotion around her. Dressed in a simple beige blazer and jeans, Amara Johnson looked like any other traveler. No designer labels, no personal assistant trailing behind, just a calm presence and eyes that carried quiet confidence. She handed over her boarding pass with a smile, the kind that was polite yet distant, as if she had seen the world enough to know how little appearances mattered. The attendant scanned her ticket and paused for a moment, noticing the code that marked a high-level VIP. She glanced up, confused, but Amara just nodded softly and proceeded towards security, unaware of the storm that awaited her midair. Inside the aircraft, the crew prepared for boarding. Clara checked the aisles with sharp eyes, fixing every detail, adjusting headrests and muttering under her breath about passengers who never follow rules. Her assistant Mia, a younger attendant full of optimism, smiled nervously and said, "It's going to be a smooth flight today, right?" Clara gave her a thin smile, replying, "Let's hope so." Outside, the sun reflected off the sleek silver body of the Skylink jet, a symbol of success, wealth, and innovation. Ironically, the very woman who had built this empire was about to board her own plane, unnoticed. As passengers started filing in, a subtle hierarchy became visible. First-class passengers were greeted with warmth, while economy travelers were ushered in with hurried politeness. Then came Amara, holding only a small leather bag and a paperback novel. She walked down the aisle with quiet grace, but Clara's eyes immediately narrowed. To her, Amara didn't look like someone who belonged in business class. There was something about the simplicity of her appearance that made Clara assume she must have been upgraded by mistake. "Good morning," Amara said softly as she found her seat. Clara forced a smile and replied, "Business class is on the right, ma'am. Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Amara glanced at her boarding pass and answered politely, "Yes, seat 3A," without arguing. She sat down, opened her book, and ignored the curious stares from a few passengers nearby. As the plane doors closed and the engines began to hum, the air inside filled with that familiar tension of takeoff, a mix of excitement and anxiety. No one, not even Clara, could have imagined that this ordinary morning flight would soon become a global headline. The stage was set, a clash between pride and power was about to unfold at 30,000 feet, and the woman who seemed invisible was about to teach everyone on board what true leadership looks like. The plane ascended smoothly into the sky, cutting through clouds bathed in soft golden light. Passengers settled into their seats, some closing their eyes, some tapping on laptops, others flipping through magazines. The familiar chime of the seatbelt sign turning off brought a collective sigh of relief. Flight 227 to London was officially underway. Among the passengers sat Amara Johnson, quiet and composed, looking out the window as the city below grew smaller and smaller. To most, she was just another traveller. No one could have guessed that she was the woman whose decisions shaped the airline they were flying on, the founder, visionary, and CEO of Skylink Airlines. But Amara wasn't travelling as a boss today. She was here to see her creation from a passenger's perspective, to experience what her customers felt, unnoticed, unrecognised, and unfiltered. Clara began her in-flight duties with mechanical precision. Every move was practiced, every smile rehearsed. Yet behind that professional mask was a storm of emotions, exhaustion, irritation, and a subtle disdain for passengers who, in her eyes, made her job harder. She walked through the aisles, adjusting trays and offering drinks, her heels clicking like a metronome of discipline. When she reached row 3, she saw Amara quietly reading, her hands resting on a worn copy of The Art of Grace. Clara frowned slightly. The title seemed ironic. She paused for a moment. Glancing at the passenger list again, Johnson, she couldn't find any special note beside the name. Probably an upgraded passenger, she thought. People like her always act like they belong up here. Would you like something to drink? Clara asked, her tone polite but noticeably cold. Yes, please, just water, Amara replied, smiling. Clara poured the water without making eye contact, handing it over with a curt nod. Anything else? No, thank you, Amara said softly, sensing the tension but choosing to stay calm. As the flight continued, small moments of disrespect began to build like cracks in glass. When a meal tray accidentally bumped Amara's arm, Clara didn't apologize. When Amara politely pressed the service button after waiting too long for her meal, Clara took nearly 20 minutes to respond. Each encounter dripped with subtle hostility, the kind rooted not in words but in tone and attitude. Other passengers noticed, whispering quietly. One elderly woman across the aisle frowned at Clara's behavior, but said nothing. Amara, however, didn't seem angry. She observed. Every move, every word, every moment of rudeness, she noted it all silently. Inside, she felt a mix of sadness and resolve. She had built Skylink Airlines on values of respect, dignity, and diversity. Every employee had been trained to treat passengers as equals. And yet, here was one of her own, proving that sometimes the greatest problems aren't in systems, but in hearts. At one point, Clara leaned toward another crew member and whispered, not so quietly, I don't understand how people like her get business-class seats, probably a free upgrade or something. Amara heard it. She didn't react, but the sting was deep. Not because of personal insult, but because it reflected a failure of the very culture she had worked to create. Outside, the clouds parted, revealing the endless blue sky, peaceful, vast, and free. Amara smiled faintly to herself. She wasn't going to expose who she was, not yet. Sometimes power speaks loudest when it stays silent. She wanted to see how far Clara's arrogance would go and how much of herself Clara would reveal when she thought no one was watching. The flight continued with laughter from one corner, complaints from another, and Clara's hurried footsteps echoing through the cabin. But beneath that routine hum, an invisible current of destiny was forming. Every action, every glance, every word was leading to a single moment, one that would turn this ordinary flight into a story the world would talk about for years to come. The mask of power was still on, but soon it would fall, revealing the truth no one was ready for. The hours passed slowly as Flight 227 cruised high above the Atlantic. Most passengers had settled into their routines, some slept under thin blue blankets, others watched movies, and a few quietly chatted with their neighbours. But for Clara, the lead flight attendant, the calm exterior of the flight masked her growing irritation. A few passengers had been demanding, one had complained about a cold meal, and another about a missing blanket. Clara's patience was thinning, and her frustration, though silent, had begun to seep into her interactions. Unfortunately, it was Amara Johnson, the quiet woman in seat 3A, who became the target of her growing resentment. When the lunch service began, Amara, who had requested a vegetarian meal online weeks earlier, was told none was available. Calmly, she explained that she had received confirmation from customer support before her flight. Clara, already overwhelmed, sighed audibly and replied with a clipped tone, "Ma'am, we can't serve what we don't have. Maybe next time double-check before boarding. The words strung, not because of what was said, but how they were said. Her tone was sharp, dismissive, and laced with condescension. Passengers nearby turned to look. A man across the aisle frowned in disbelief. Amara, maintaining her composure, gave a soft nod and replied, "That's all right. Just a cup of tea will be fine." But Clara wasn't finished. "You know, sometimes it helps to travel prepared," she added, half under her breath yet loud enough for Amara to hear. The jab was unnecessary and Amara knew it. She looked up, her eyes calm but steady. "Preparedness," she said gently, "is something I've always valued, especially in people who serve others." The words, though spoken kindly, carried weight. Clara's cheeks flushed. She didn't like being challenged, especially by someone she had already labelled in her mind as ordinary. She gave a forced smile and walked away, pretending not to hear the quiet murmurs spreading among the passengers. A few rows back, Mia, the younger flight attendant, whispered, "Clara, I think you might have gone a little too far." But Clara brushed her off. "Please, Mia, some passengers think the world revolves around them. You have to remind them where they are sometimes." The arrogance in her tone was clear. What she didn't realize was that every act of disrespect she showed was being silently recorded by fate, and as it turned out, by a passenger's phone camera as well. Hours later, during the second meal service, the real spark ignited. Amara had fallen asleep with her reading glasses still on. When Clara passed by with the cart, she nudged Amara's arm rather roughly and said, "Excuse me, miss, you can't keep your tray table down like that." Amara woke, startled, and instinctively asked, "I'm sorry, could you please be gentler?" Her tone wasn't rude, just surprised, but Clara snapped, "Ma'am, I'm doing my job. If you can't handle that, maybe you should reconsider how you travel." The nearby passengers went silent. A man in a suit whispered, "That's not right." A mother holding her child looked away uncomfortably. Amara's eyes locked onto Clara's. For the first time, her calm exterior showed a hint of steel. "I don't think speaking to passengers this way is part of your job," she said softly but firmly. The cabin's atmosphere grew thick. Clara's pride flared, her authority challenged. "Are you implying I don't know how to do my job?" Clara shot back, her voice louder now. Passengers began to turn their heads. The captain's announcement over the speakers, "Ladies and gentlemen, will be landing in approximately 3 hours," barely cut through the rising tension. Amara took a slow breath, trying to de-escalate. "No, I'm saying that kindness is part of service, that's all." But Clara, blinded by ego, took a step closer. "You know what, I don't need to be lectured on kindness by someone who doesn't even belong in business class." The words echoed. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Amara froze. The passengers stared in shock. Mia's eyes widened. She mouthed, "Clara, stop." Then it happened, the moment that would change everything. As Amara stood up, calmly statting, "You're out of line," Clara's anger snapped. In a split second of rage, she raised her hand and slapped Amara across the face. The sound was sharp, a single, unmistakable crack that cut through the hum of the engines. Silence followed, complete, terrifying silence. The passengers were frozen, mouths open, phones already lifting into the air to record what had just happened. Mia gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. Amara didn't move for a long second. Then slowly she straightened her posture. Her expression was calm, almost heartbreakingly composed. She looked Clara dead in the eye and said quietly, "You just made a decision that will follow you for the rest of your life." The words hung heavy in the air, the kind of silence that carries weight, the kind that changes everything. Clara blinked, realizing what she had done, her confidence melting into shock. But it was too late, the cameras were rolling, the truth had been seen. And 30,000 feet above the earth, justice was quietly preparing to descend. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The sound of that slap still echoed through the cabin like a gunshot, bouncing off the metal walls and the stunned faces of every passenger on board. Even the engines, with their constant roaring hum, felt distant now, replaced by the sound of collective disbelief. Clara stood frozen, her hand trembling, her eyes wide with immediate regret. The reality of what she'd done hit her like turbulence in a clear sky. Amara Johnson, still as a statue, slowly turned her face back toward Clara. A faint red mark bloomed across her cheek, but her expression remained unreadable, calm, controlled, dignified. There was no shouting, no retaliation, no tearful outburst. Instead, she looked at Clara with a quiet authority that somehow felt far more intimidating than anger. Around them, whispers began to fill the air. Did she just, "Oh my God, did that really happen? Someone's filming this." Passengers clutched their phones, recording the aftermath. Mia, standing only a few feet away, was frozen in horror. "Clara," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what did you just do?" But Clara didn't respond. Her throat was dry, her mind spinning in panic. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to undo the last 5 seconds, but it was too late. The cameras were up, and every second of her breakdown was being captured from multiple angles. Amara blinked once slowly and then spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of thunder. You just made a choice that will define your career and your character. Her words weren't loud, but they reached everyone in that cabin. A young man in row 4 lowered his phone, visibly shaken. A child whispered to his mother, "Why did she hit her?" The mother hushed him, unable to look away. Clara tried to regain her composure. She was being disrespectful, she stammered, turning to the passengers as if begging for validation. "I didn't mean," she provoked, but her words crumbled under the silence that followed. No one supported her. Even her fellow crew members stood still, ashamed, not daring to meet her eyes. Amara slowly picked up her book, her movements graceful and deliberate, and said to the nearest attendant, "Please inform your captain that I'd like to speak with management upon landing." Her tone was steady, no shouting, no rage. That calmness unsettled Clara even more than any argument could have. It was the kind of calm that came from power. Quiet, deep power. The captain's voice suddenly broke through the cabin speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we deal with an onboard issue. We appreciate your cooperation." His tone was measured, but tension laced every word. The crew moved hesitantly, whispering to one another, unsure how to proceed. Mia gently approached Amara. "Ma'am, are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft and apologetic. Amara gave a small smile and nodded. "I'm fine, but you should be careful who you allow to represent your airline." The comment sent a chill down Mia's spine. She didn't yet understand how literal that warning was. Clara, meanwhile, had retreated to the galley, her hands shaking as she tried to breathe. "I didn't mean to, she muttered, her voice breaking. She looked down at her trembling fingers, the same hand that had just struck a woman, a passenger, and in that instant she realized how irreversible her action was. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a wave of shame and fear. "They're filming me," she whispered. "They're all filming me." Mia's voice came from behind her, calm but cold. "You should start thinking about what you're going to say when we land." The next 3 hours were some of the longest in the history of Flight 227. The cabin was quiet, heavy with discomfort. No one dared to speak loudly. Every time Clara walked down the aisle, eyes followed her like shadows. Amara remained still, reading her book again as though nothing had happened, though a faint, almost invisible sadness lingered in her gaze. When the plane finally began its descent toward Heathrow, the tension in the air was suffocating. The passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone knew this flight was going to make headlines. The moment the wheels touched down, phones buzzed, social media already flooded with clips from the cabin. "Flight attendant slaps passenger mid-flight," one caption read. "Skylink scandal," another. Clara's world was unraveling before the doors even opened. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Amara calmly closed her book, adjusted her blazer, and turned to Clara one last time. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "people mistake humility for weakness, but humility is what separates leaders from servants of ego." Then she stood up, her voice level but commanding. "I'll wait in the lounge. You'll know who I am soon enough." Clara watched her walk away, confusion and dread colliding in her chest. She didn't yet understand what Amara meant, but she was about to. Because when that plane's door opened and Amara Johnson stepped off into the terminal, she wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was walking straight into her own empire, and Clara's greatest lesson was about to begin. The engines had barely cooled as Flight 227 rolled to a stop at Heathrow Airport, but inside the aircraft, the atmosphere was far from calm. You could almost feel the tension pulsing through the cabin like invisible electricity. The passengers sat still, unsure whether to move or remain seated. Everyone's eyes seemed to flicker between Amara Johnson, still quietly composed in her seat, and Clara Thompson, whose confidence had shattered into a visible mix of guilt and disbelief. The echo of that slap still lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of a mistake that could never be undone. Clara's heart thudded in her chest as she straightened her uniform. Her mouth was dry, her hands trembling, and her mind kept looping the same horrifying thought: "What have I done?" She tried to appear calm for the passengers' sake, forcing a brittle smile as she made the final announcements. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London." Her voice faltered for a split second. "Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop." But no one was listening. The murmurs and side glances made it clear. Everyone knew what had happened. And worse, many had it recorded. Amara, meanwhile, sat still, serene, almost regal. She wasn't scrolling through her phone or talking to anyone. She simply looked out the window, her reflection calm against the rising sun. Inside, however, her thoughts were steady but firm. She had spent her entire career teaching her team that respect was not optional, that compassion was the foundation of Skylink Airlines. Yet here she was, a living witness to how those values had eroded, right under her watch. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers began gathering their belongings, whispering as they did. One man muttered, "That woman's composure, I'd have lost it." Another whispered to his wife, "Did you hear her name? Johnson. Something about her feels important." Their curiosity was growing, but the truth that was about to emerge would silence everyone. As the cabin doors opened, 2 ground staff members entered briskly. They scanned the crowd, their eyes landing immediately on Amara. "Ms. Johnson," one said respectfully, "your transport is ready. The regional manager is waiting in the executive lounge." The words hit like a quiet bomb. Ms. Johnson, the same name that had appeared countless times on company newsletters, training manuals, and executive memos, always beneath the title founder and CEO of Skylink Airlines. A ripple of whispers swept through the cabin. Heads turned. And then realization dawned. Clara, who had been standing near the galley, froze. The color drained from her face. Her hands dropped to her sides as the name repeated in her mind like a cruel echo. Ms. Johnson, Amara Johnson, the CEO. Her legs felt weak, her chest tight. "No," she whispered under her breath. "That can't be her." But deep down she knew. The calm demeanor, the quiet authority, the way everyone now addressed her, it all fit. Amara rose from her seat with elegance, adjusting her blazer. The red mark on her cheek had faded, but its memory remained. She turned to Mia, the younger attendant who had shown her kindness, and gave her a small nod. "Thank you for your professionalism," she said softly. Mia, now pale and speechless, nodded back, realizing she had just served the woman who owned the entire company. Clara watched in silence as Amara exited the aircraft, escorted by senior staff. Her stomach churned with dread. The captain called her name quietly. "Clara, we need to talk before debrief." His voice wasn't angry, it was disappointed, which somehow hurt more. Minutes later, in the crew office, the truth hit her in full. The regional manager entered with a grim expression. "Clara, the passenger you assaulted was Ms. Amara Johnson, the CEO." Clara's breath caught in her throat, her mind went blank. "The CEO," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know." The manager sighed deeply. "That doesn't matter anymore. The incident was recorded by several passengers, it's already on social media." He paused, sliding his phone across the table. On the screen was a video clip already going viral. Clara's raised hand, the sharp sound, and Amara's hauntingly calm words afterward. The title beneath it read, "Flight attendant slaps passenger not knowing she owned the airline." Clara's world shattered in that instant. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Oh God, what have I done?" But no amount of tears could undo what the world had already seen. Across the airport, in the executive lounge, Amara sat surrounded by regional directors, legal staff, and PR officers, all speaking at once. "Ms. Johnson, we can issue a public statement immediately. We'll suspend her pending investigation. Do you want us to involve legal counsel?" Amara raised her hand, silencing them all. "I don't want revenge," she said evenly. "I want reflection. She needs to understand the weight of her actions, not through punishment but through perspective." Her tone carried quiet authority, the kind that didn't need volume to command attention. The executives exchanged glances, they knew what that meant. Back in the crew office, Clara sat alone after the meeting, staring blankly at her hands, the same hands that had served thousands of passengers with grace until today. Her entire career, everything she had built, was slipping away. But more painful than the fear of losing her job was the shame of realizing she had hurt the very woman who embodied the principles she had sworn to uphold. Above the runway, another Skylink aircraft roared into the sky, a reminder that the company would move forward, but Clara's life had just entered its own turbulence. What she didn't know yet was that Amara wasn't finished with her story. Because instead of condemnation, Amara Johnson had something far more powerful in mind, a lesson that would redefine Clara's life and the entire airline forever. The next morning, the story had spread across every corner of the internet. News channels, blogs, and social media were flooded with clips from Flight 227. The headline was everywhere: "Flight attendant slaps black CEO not knowing she owned the airline." Thousands of comments poured in, some condemning the act, others praising Amara's calmness, and many reflecting on the deeper meaning behind the event. It wasn't just a viral story anymore, it had become a conversation about race, respect, and power. Inside Skylink's corporate headquarters, tension ran high. Clara sat quietly in a small conference room, her eyes red and swollen. She hadn't slept. Every sound of a phone notification made her flinch. She knew what it meant. Another wave of online outrage. She had received hundreds of messages, some hateful, some disappointed, and some that simply asked one painful question: why? The door opened. Amara Johnson stepped in, her presence calm yet commanding. She wasn't surrounded by lawyers or PR staff this time. It was just her, the woman Clara had humiliated, now standing before her in silence. Clara immediately stood up, tears blurring her vision. "Ms. Johnson, I can't even begin to," she stammered, her voice cracking. Amara raised a hand gently, stopping her. "Please sit." Clara hesitated, then obeyed. The room was thick with emotion. For a long moment Amara said nothing. She simply looked at the woman in front of her, a woman broken by her own actions. Finally, she spoke. "Clara, tell me, why did you react the way you did?" The question caught Clara off guard. I thought she was being disrespectful," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I was tired, we had a long flight. She refused to sit when I asked. I didn't know who she was, but that shouldn't have mattered." Her voice broke completely now. "I don't know what came over me. I'm ashamed, Ms. Johnson, truly." Amara nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "You're right, it shouldn't have mattered who I was. That's exactly the point." She leaned forward slightly, her tone calm but powerful. "You see, respect isn't something you offer based on titles, wealth, or skin color. It's something you give because it's right, because it's human." Clara lowered her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I ruined everything," she whispered. "I don't expect forgiveness, I don't even deserve it." Amara took a deep breath and stood. "Clara, what you did was wrong, deeply wrong. But this isn't about punishment, it's about accountability and growth." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I built Skylink on the belief that every person deserves dignity. From the passenger in economy to the CEO in first class, if I fire you today, you'll leave angry, humiliated, and unchanged. But if I give you a chance to learn, maybe, just maybe, you'll become the kind of leader this airline needs." Clara looked up, confusion mixing with disbelief. "You're not firing me." Amara smiled faintly. "No, you'll be suspended for a short period, but after that I want you to join our empathy training program. You'll work directly under our community outreach division, visiting schools, training centers, and shelters. You'll hear real stories from people who have faced discrimination. And then you'll come back and train our new flight attendants. Teach them not from theory, but from your own mistake." Clara's lips trembled. "You're giving me another chance." "I'm giving you responsibility," Amara corrected gently. "There's a difference." For a moment the room fell silent again. Then Clara broke down completely, not out of fear this time, but out of overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you, Ms. Johnson," she whispered. "I promise I'll make this right." Amara turned toward the window, gazing at the Skylink jets taxiing outside. "Clara," she said softly, "you already started